Between 2001 and 2010, Bungie was a world-class player in gaming. I'd say they made the original Xbox and 360s consoles to be reckoned with. Since then, they've seen a fall from grace. They were immensely unhappy working under Microsoft with limited budgets and tight deadlines for the Halo games. So it was great when they finally bought their freedom and announced Destiny. But of all the companies they could have teamed up with, they decided to make a deal with Activision. It seems like there was a lot more money in working under this new publisher, but I'm not sure how much their creative process was hampered by the decision. I'll need to do a bit more reading on how much Activision affected what Destiny became, but for now I'd like to talk about why I enjoyed Destiny and how they could have improved the game. Yes, this will just be my opinion, but if you want an objective review, there's hundreds out there you can watch. Where Destiny really shines and doesn't get enough praise for is its combat. It feels like a true sequel to Halo in this aspect. The guns have weight. This is conveyed to the player through good animation and enemy reactions to being hit. When firing, the gun moves around corresponding to recoil and the Guardian's control of the weapon. When a round finally strikes an enemy, they'll lurch back from the impact. Sure, there's also a health bar showing how much damage you're dealing, but even without that, you can recognize that something's happening. This is something that a lot of AAA games nowadays are still missing. Besides the feel of the weapons, you also have access to plenty of different powers like double jumps, jump packs, explosive grenades of different elements, throwing knives, debuffs, and smoke grenades. It really helps this feel different from a Halo game and not just a boring shooter either. Another cool part of the game is each planet has its own distinct design. Be it the snowy ruins on Earth, red deserts of Mars, or the lush green fields of Venus. Each world has a main area for exploration, then is fragmented into different mission areas. This in itself is great. A problem that arises is some of these zones are only used once, when others are used 4 or 5 times, which kills replayability. If you're trudging through an area for the 50th time, it doesn't matter what mission you're doing, it gets boring. These missions are separated into 3 categories: story missions, strikes, and raids. Story missions are around 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay. They only offer 1 or 2 difficulties to be played, and past the first playthrough, they don't offer any reward to the player. Strikes offer a nice challenge, are typically 30 to 45 minutes long, and are built to be the most replayed aspect of the game. Destiny allows them to be replayed through playlists, which give a certain amount of rewards to the player each week. I can't talk too much about raids as I've only completed Crota's End once, but they're about 2 to 3 hours long and require 5 to 6 people to complete. There's also the Prison of Elders, which doesn't really fit into the 3 categories, but it's basically Destiny's version of a horde mode. It's more similar to raids in that it's one of the most rewarding events to play. I mention the mission types because there is enough content in the game to garner a purchase, but the main flaw I see in Destiny is the mismanagement of this content. There's 51 missions you'll only play once, because playing through it again gleans no reward and doesn't scale with your level. If you do decide to replay these missions, you'll simply be overleveled and find no resistance. You're able to stroll through room after room, clearing them in seconds. I don't know about you, but if there's a lack of challenge, I find no enjoyment. To bring up a game which does this better, Diablo 3 offers a difficulty slider which can be changed at any time. If you find an area too easy or want to replay an easier bit of the game, up the difficulty and get rewarded for killing higher level monsters. I don't know why Destiny didn't do something so simple, but this would have given us 51 more missions to replay. Which leads me to my next complaint. Why can't we select which strike we want to play on X difficulty? Yes, some strikes are easier than others, so players could just pick the easiest one to farm gear from, but you already limit the amount of gear you can get per playlist each week, so why not do this per strike? This change would let a player who's sick of killing the Hydra at the end of the Nexus strike play something else for once. I couldn't tell you how many times I've completed the Nexus, but it could account for 50 hours of my Destiny playtime. Finally, the biggest problems with raids is how they require at least 6 players. Adjusting the difficulty based on how many players are participating would have extended this content to everyone rather than a small subset of dedicated players. Sure, it would have taken a bit more development time, but if you're spending a rumored $500 million on your advertising budget instead of the game itself, I'd question your chain of command's mental state. Similarly, the enemy design lacks depth. It's simply spread too thin. Instead of having 4, almost 5 different enemy factions, I'd rather we see 2 or 3, fully thought out. With the release of DLC, they did develop the Cabal, Hive, and Fallen enough to where I know about their history and can distinguish between them, but the Vex and Taken are just sort of there. It doesn't help that the enemy movesets were just reused in the Taken and nothing really stood out when fighting the Vex versus the Hive. I think dropping them entirely would have afforded Bungie more resources to develop other factions. Speaking about DLC, if you purchased them as they were released, you basically got ripped off. You were charged $60 for about 29 missions in the base game, $20 for 7 missions in Dark Below, $20 for 8 missions in House of Wolves, $40 for 16 missions in Taken King, and $30 for the last 12 missions in Rise of Iron, totaling $170. That's if you didn't purchase Destiny on the previous generation of consoles, then upgraded later to Destiny on the current generation. A mistake I made. Sure, I have around 270 hours in both versions, so dollars per hour I got my money's worth, but if we assume there's only 12.5 hours of gameplay before replaying content, that's a very high price. 12.5 hours comes from an approximation based on the number of each mission type. It's probably closer to 18 or 20 hours, but if I sold you the greatest game in the world at that length for $170, I would be crucified. In addition to all these issues, the PvP in Destiny is probably Bungie's weakest attempt at multiplayer throughout their catalog. I wouldn't say it's a balance problem, it's more of a combination of things. What stands out to me is the time to kill. It's way too low in a game with magical powers and world-raising weapons. If you don't see a player coming, he'll kill you before you can react. In comparison, the time to kill in the Halo games was enough to realize where you're being shot from and either evade the enemy or strike back, letting you as a player feel it's your fault for dying instead of dropping dead immediately and blaming your teammates or lag. I guess the only reason I'm so upset about the game is I truly was in love with it, and was okay paying the price of the DLC, and even buying the game twice to play with my roommates, because it's fun. You know, there's a lot of stuff to be enjoyed in the game. There's just little things they could have done to improve it. The reason I'm never going to pick up the game again or buy Destiny 2 is because even after that $170 intro price or $60 collection price you can get now, they introduced microtransactions so they can bleed the players for even more money. And, you know, that was the last straw for me. Yes, it's a good game, and microtransactions are becoming even more regular in everything else. But it was a game I praised for at least not having microtransactions. It was a selling point for me. And they took that away after I had spent all this money. It really sucks to see Bungie so low. I guess my mind could be changed about Destiny 2 if it's an outstanding game without microtransactions and, gives you the ability to replay the game and still be rewarded. But it's going to be an uphill battle for them, and I wish there were people who felt this strongly about it. Because if we could boycott evil things, and if people didn't actually pay for microtransactions, we wouldn't have them in gaming. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know how well my performance was of this script. I'm trying to get off of scripted content because it's a lot more fluid and my script writing voice sucks, but we'll see as it goes. See you in the next one.
Those suffering from cabin fever may show signs of irritability, listlessness, and similar symptoms resulting from long confinement or isolation indoors.